Hello, guys. This is the ANGARI lab. My name is Chris Norris. I'm Pensacola, Florida, Ransom Middle School, 8th grade. And we had a great time this week working with Dr. Stephen Kajuri, Dr. Amanda Waite, and Captain Angela Rosenberg with our research in underwater ecosystems. And they do a lot of educational outreach down there. So I wish more information would come up panhandle a little bit, but specifically this week we learned how sharks influence all other organisms around the ecosystem, and so what we tied into a lot of information on nature of science. We pulled a lot of information that could be used for middle school as well as high school. So we're breaking this up into two different lesson plans. More specific, blacktip shark migration was the topic I chose for a lesson. I'm an 8th grade science teacher, so we kind of using some of the nature of science to get some information across to the students. And we could either put this lesson in the beginning of the year when we kind of dive into the nature of science to give an overall overview of how science works, or we could actually, when we get into the ecology section of our pacing guide towards the end of the year, we could do this at 2 different times. But this lesson is going to be we're 45-minute class period, so it's not long. So we wanted to pull this out for a 3-day time period, a 3-day class period. Some of the prior knowledge is learning how to graph, knowing how to graph, and some related vocabulary words that are involved. Next. Learning standards and content-related standards where science involves creativity, science should be replicated, involve discussions, comparisons, negotiating methods, and should have results, variables, observations, relations among organisms was the content specific, limiting factors in an ecosystem, also content related. Next. All right, so some of the simple materials that we're going to use is graph paper, Chromebook, PC. We've got some cool VR headsets. I was lucky to have a class set of this at school to use as a final product. And then digital resources that we have that were given to us along this week, some valuable resources. And then some of our learning goal and objective is, so by the end of the week, by the end of this lesson, students will be able to identify, chart, and interpret data regarding the migration patterns of blacktip sharks. So that's what I kind of honed in on with this week's lesson. Next. And just the vocabulary terms that we brought out this week of some of the things that they've learned through 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And some of these terms are going to be prior knowledge that they're going to probably need to know, or we'll learn along the way. Next. All right, so day 1 is going to be a pre-assessment to test their prior knowledge of what they know about sharks. A lot of 8th grade students have some misconceptions about sharks. So it's just going to be an interesting pre-assessment on what they do know about sharks. And also an icebreaker that I want to throw in there is those common misconceptions. So you can see this humorous human-eating predator out for blood to devour humans at all costs. So I think every student, every one of our students, when they go to the beach, Pensacola has a beautiful beach up here, the first thing they think of when they set foot in the water is, I've got to look out for sharks. But you know, we've kind of got that. We'll bring some statistics into the icebreaker and to educate them that sharks are not out to get humans, and you know, they're just out for they're just basically like us, trying to survive in an unchanging or ever-changing world. So next. All right, this is a fun activity that I wanted to kind of bring to the students, and this is a little video. It's only about a 39-second video, but we're going to do some shark counting. And Brian, if you're able to play that, we could actually count sharks ourselves.
Let's see if this works. We switch fast.
So this will be their first hand on seeing some sharks underwater. And so we're going to be doing a lot of shark counting throughout this lesson. And we're going to be doing a lot of data plotting. And next video we're going to be playing is some sharks swimming off the shore. And the students are going to be amazed to see this next video, all along with that video as well. And I don't know if this is going to get the kids more scared than not, but next slide, please. All right, so we had Dr. Kajura, he is actually a pilot, and they actually go off the coast of Florida and video these black-tip sharks swimming along the coast, and they're right along the shoreline if you didn't notice. But Brian, if you could play this one also, it's just about a 19-second video, but this is just the interesting way sharks migrate in a certain pattern. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have students play this video, and they're going to stop it frame by frame and try to count the number of sharks that we see in this area. And however they do it, there are going to be multiple groups that are going to do this, so they can kind of get their own way of counting frame by frame, or different ways of counting these sharks to use for further graphing. All right, next slide. All right, so day 2, we're going to be putting this information on how many sharks they actually saw, and use some different data tables and outside resources to come up with the dates and times these sharks are able to be seen, what the water temperature is, and that we learned actually the water temperature does have a big influence on where sharks go and how far they actually go. We're going to throw in pH, which is one of the vocabulary words, calculating speed of the sharks, distance between each shark. They seem like they're kind of close together. So density per square kilometer for that shark population, and probably a few more data tables that we can come up with. Next slide. All right, so day 3, we're going to take a little more time to finalize these charts, and we're probably going to have different groups do different data sets, and so we can kind of average and compare with all of the other students' data sets. Each group can kind of share out their findings, which will be kind of interesting to see what they've come up with. And then on day 3, that's where we're going to have the virtual scientist in the classroom for question and answer sessions, and just a little bit of research information on what they do, and to further explain what we've accomplished so far, so the students can actually ask some questions on what they've done so far. Next. And these are the experts that we could call into the classroom. We're going to be calling into the classroom, and it's been a pleasure working with them, and I'm sure my students will be joyful to see these guys, to hear from another faith, and to see some experts in the field also. These guys are amazing. Next slide. And so day 3, we're going to finish off with a post-test on what they've learned, anything that we need to review or revisit, and then a culminating assignment or activity, which was the Generation Ocean Sharks, which was a VR experience we got to witness, which is still in the production stage. So we were one of the lucky few to get a view of this. It will be probably and hopefully in viewing status when I get to my students, but it's a wonderful experience that these guys are working on. Next. Just a few more standards that we wanted to throw in, but that is a middle school aspect of this. I'm gonna turn it over to Heidi, and she's gonna go over more of a high school lesson.
Not Heidi. Not Heidi.
Oh, sure. Sorry, Heidi. She's biology. Sorry.
So I'm Elizabeth. I will do the high school portion. Yeah, that's okay, Chris. So actually, my lesson's very similar to Chris's. I teach primarily 9th and 10th graders. So his lesson that's geared towards the 8th graders is pretty similar. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over everything that Chris did, just because a lot of it is the same. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So again, we need a lot of the same materials and we have a lot of the same learning goals. Chris and I both kind of want to focus on getting students to graph data, interact with data, interpret and analyze data. So those are a lot of our learning goals and objectives for our particular lesson on shark. What's different for our high school level is that we're, in my classroom, our assessment is more focused on writing out a scientific explanation. So based off the evidence that students have gathered and the data that they've interacted with, be able to write a scientific explanation that includes a claim, is supported by evidence, and is tied all together with reasoning. Next slide, please. So again, some very similar activities. I would incorporate at the high school level a little bit of independent learning from the students. So engaging their prior knowledge about sharks. What do they already know? What do they hope to learn about sharks? And then complete sort of a web investigation activity where they're learning about the anatomy of sharks, how they're classified, where they live, their ecological role, and things like that. For a second activity, if we are in person, but this can be adapted to virtual as well, some sort of rotations of stations where at one station they're watching the Generation Ocean Sharks video using the VR sets that Chris mentioned, and trying to gather information about the methods that the researchers have been using to study sharks. At a second station, they would focus on that migratory behavior that Chris touched on, so making observations about what they see, going through and counting the number of sharks. And then at a third station, using some ocean condition data to plot and make graphs to see if they can see any connections between migratory behaviors and ocean conditions. And then we would, again, wrap this up with a virtual visit from one of our amazing scientists from this week. Next slide, please. And then these are the high school learning standards, very similar to the ones that Chris touched on, but just a little bit different.